What are we listening to today?
The Immigrant Project by Girish and Astha.
Welcome to another episode of the Immigrant Project. We have Randy Hahn with us today, and behind the camera, as usual, we have our producer Asta Taneja. Randy Hahn has been with Garcon Immigration Law and has been in the field of immigration law,
Immigration
immigration law
lawyer.
for the
Yeah.
past 20 plus years. Randy, welcome on the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Randy, so immigration is an extremely hot topic right now, both south of the border and in Canada. And government has recently revised some rules. They have reduced immigration levels for next year by about 21% cut down. But I'll come to that question later. First of all, I wanted to understand from you. I saw a recent poll and it said that 58% of the Canadians are not in favor of immigration anymore, which is not the case maybe a decade or so back. What are your thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, I'm not surprised. I say unfortunately because I think that particularly in recent years, there's been a number of missteps on the part of the government in terms of the way they've rolled out certain programs and certain initiatives. The Canada, as you'll know, historically has been a country that's been very welcoming of immigrants, but there's been number of pressures and stresses recently, and the initiatives or the responses that the government has given recently, frankly, in some ways, I liken it to the arsonist who's suggesting how the fire might be put out. I think they've really contributed to some, significant challenges the last few years. Were uh, uh, all sorts of, you pick up the paper, as you'll know, like every day there's another headline in terms of, fraud in the labor market impact assessment
Oh
system
yeah,
through Employment Services Development Canada through, and then connected with that, the minister appropriately at this time, I would think, and Doug Ford rhyming in as well, getting very angry at the consultants, who I think
oh
are
yeah.
many of whom are complicit with that. The students, it's been outrageous what's happened in terms of the number of people from places who've been promised a bill of goods, if you will, including to some extent from the Canadian government, not just consultants they've been working with or something, said, yeah, come to Canada, come on a study permit, pay all this money, you'll have a
Exactly.
Canadian education transition to permanent residence. And then and then the huge stresses on the refugee system in terms of the determination system, and that's only going to probably grow exponentially as
Yeah.
matters play themselves out down south. So all those stuff and security concerns, I should
Oh yeah.
add. There's been a couple of important and well-known and notorious cases lately where bad actors have managed to get into Canada. So all that,
Yes.
I think, has combined to the statistic you said. Now, having said that, what I liken, with people with who practice in the area of immigration law, as I do, at least, speaking for myself, and in some ways, I think we're approaching it both we're both microbiologists and astronomers.
Okay.
And I know the microbiologists or astronomers may,
Zooming in, zooming out.
yeah, exactly. They may say what you, but it's in some ways the telescopic view of big trends, numbers, what's going on overall, and we have a feel for that. And there's the problems you said, but the microbiology, the microscopic view. At the end of the day, there's individual people,
Yeah.
families who are navigating this. They come in to see, myself or my colleagues, and to try to figure out a way to get the system. Each one has their own circumstances, and I think as policymakers and politicians and pundits weigh in on certain important issues, not to lose sight of that very important factors, people's lives, livelihoods, and futures involved at the end of the day.
That's a fantastic answer, and I think something needs to be done to crack down on these bad actors, which the Prime Minister recently said in his recent YouTube video. Bad actors were the cause. Anyway, yeah. To add to that, I wanted to say, Randy, that students, international students, they bring in at least $1.1 billion to the economy each year, and it is unfortunate that this is happening to the students as well. I want to move on to my next question. Like I said, Mark Miller recently reduced, or rather, the government recently reduced the immigration levels for the next 3 years by 21%. So now they are bringing in around 395,000 immigrants to the country next year. What sort of implications do you think that will have for future aspirants coming to Canada? as well as the labor market in general for the country?
Well, the easy and honest answer is it's difficult to say. Having said that, I can offer some conjecture on what might happen in terms of the aspirants to the country.
Yeah,
I think, getting back to, what I was touching on some moments ago about the serious problems there were with that, there's been particularly with students coming and being taken advantage of. In some ways, to be frank, by some of the educational institutions, in some ways by the government for allowing it to happen, then worst case by people who are just outright fraud with the money. And all that, I think, will contribute to many potential immigrants to Canada sort of, hey, I've heard my cousin, my friend, my neighbor, had
yeah.
difficulty. Do I want to go to Canada? Ultimately, it's a
Oh
comparison. Well,
no.
what are the other options? But it's just a matter of saving up the family money and trying to figure out how to go, or whether to go. That's going to be, I think, an ongoing issue. Now, in terms of the other side, in terms of the economy and what it means for Canada, there may be some, heavy sailing, heavy weather ahead, if I put it that way. The at the immediate level, I think, as we're all well aware, there's a number of employers who rely very much on foreign nationals to be part of their workforce,
Hmm.
and to sometimes it's a matter of bringing in a number of people under the foreign worker program, getting labor market impact
Especially for
assessments
construction,
for
agriculture,
construction,
service,
agriculture,
doctors,
notoriously short.
nurses, so many people.
Doctors, nurses, sort of a different dynamic, if you will, or something. But a number of doctors, nurses, I wouldn't put in this, but a number under the low wage,
Yeah,
people doing the important job of, getting, serving us coffee and fast food, which we all need. A lot of that workforce too is are students who've come. And way back when, or it wasn't even that far way back when, students had come and they could maybe work on campus, but that's all. And then evolved that they could work off campus up to a certain number of hours a week, 20
yeah,
hours
20 hours.
initially,
Right?
and then it
Oh,
went up to
it,
more,
this is
effectively
pandemic,
almost like
right?
a full-time job.
Yeah,
Now, I saw the other day when the prime minister was giving his one of his periodic apologies, if you will, for one thing or another. And this one, when he was announcing the um, perspective and the changes in the immigration system,
yeah,
and the apology he did offer, well, we didn't see it all coming, or we didn't respond as quickly as we did. But part of his explanation, and in fairness to him, I think there was something here. Is the pandemic was obviously a huge disruptor, to use the contemporary jargon,
yeah,
but in terms of the effects of the economy, and there was serious shortage of labor, certainly in certain sectors, still remains so in Canada, and it was thought, okay, well, this is a way to address it partly. And a lot of employers, notoriously a lot of large employers, have become reliant on foreign nationals, be they general business or skilled workers, or through the foreign worker program, or hiring students or something. And I think that's going to um, be a challenge for a lot of those employers. And in terms of the economy, well, I'm not an economist, but reflecting back on the rudimentary economic principles that are long ago, lower availability of labor, the
yeah.
cost of labor is going to rise, the cost of goods may rise, and so on and so forth. But the other part of it, people hoping, well, okay, that the cost of housing in places like Toronto, where we're at, may be less, less, stresses on the housing
Housing
market.
has been stressed a lot
Yeah,
because of the influx of a lot of people in the country.
yeah. So it's hard to say, but I think it'll be for interesting and challenging times. Although I, remarked a few moments ago, I was very, sort of skeptical, put it kindly, in a lot of the policy that's come out of the government, particularly in recent years. I will say, in all fairness, that it is difficult to um, pivot and be as nimble as ideally, they might want or they might need to be to responding to various geopolitical, economic, legal circumstances. For example, as we're aware, we're uh, speaking now toward the end of November and January, new president or
Yeah.
old president revisited
Re-
comes
45.
in, and as we know, one of the key pieces of his um, platform is to take serious steps to remove a large number of illegal immigrants, or those who have overstayed, some for a substantial number of years in the U.S. Now, exactly how that's done, what it looks like, remains to be seen. But I think it's fair to say they're pretty serious about it, and that will quite possibly and quite likely add a significant stress to the refugee system in Canada. How that is because people who come to Canada, uh, as a starting point, if they get to Canada and they're so inclined, they can make a claim for refugee status, say that
Yeah.
they have the risk of being persecuted based on one of a enumerated number of grounds. Now, there's what's called the Safe Third Party Agreement, which we're coming up to close to 20 years now. I think that's been in existence, that then
Okay.
carves out people coming from the United States. Citizens from the United States can make a claim in Canada, but not many
You
do.
mean a refugee claim?
Refugee claim.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and but non-citizens, it used to be like when I initially started practicing, there was a regular stream of people who would come up, somehow get to the United States and then come to Canada to make refugee claims. The reason being that they thought they would get a more sympathetic and receptive hearing in Canada that they might in the United States.
Okay.
Canada negotiated what's called the Safe Third Party Agreement with the United
CUSMA.
States that said we're cutting that off. In the United States had to agree that anyone presenting themselves at the border in Canada or at an airline not eligible to make a refugee claim, with some specific exceptions, but by and
Hmm.
large it cut out most people. Um, and that's been the case. Now, a couple of years ago now, you may or may not recall that there was a loophole there that a number of people would say, oh, well, the way it works is if I get to the port of entry, I get to Pearson Airport in Toronto, I get to
I claim
Niagara Falls,
yeah,
okay, I can't make my claim. But if I go through the
Roxton
border
Road,
another way, for example, Roxham
Roxton.
Road,
Yeah.
notoriously, going into Quebec, that I could do. So that turned into an almost an official unofficial, if I could put it that way, port of
Yeah.
entry. They closed that loophole and said, no, we stop you anywhere along the border, you can't make the claim. So you think, okay, that's fine. If you're from the perspective, we want to do what we can to reduce the numbers, but there's still a loophole, if I could put it that way, where if someone does manage to get in through the country and is here for 2 weeks,
2 weeks. Okay.
and then they can pop up and say, "Hey, I want to make a refugee claim." So there's talk and concern now that the Canadian government, they would have to uh, get the United States to agree because it's part of a treaty, but to say, okay, let's cut out that part as well too, because the concern on the part of the Canadians is that there's a large number of people from the United States who are there illegally, who are being forced out. And although the outcome in Canada may be uncertain, they'll take that outcome rather than the more uncertain or less desirable outcomes of other choices they may have, including going back to their country of citizenship. And at this point, the refugee determination process, it varies, but broadly speaking, we're talking 3-4 years for someone to get a hearing. They can be working in the meantime. Add to those numbers considerably that processing time will only go up. All that translates into
Are
that could be a significant stress on Canada's immigration
are
system
these refugees allowed to work legally in the country if they come to the country
while they're waiting for
while they're
their
waiting for
claim.
they
Yeah.
can?
So from their point of view, it's there's incentives for them to take advantage and to come into Canada illegally. Now, getting back to what I said, the telescopic, the microbiologist, if you will, the telescopic, if you're planning this, is say we can't just practically and administratively, to have a country where there's substantial numbers of people pouring over the border.
Yeah,
We're under the stresses that we are. The last few years has only add to it considerably. And I think it's fair to say that a number of them, not insignificant number, would be what might broadly be described as economic refugees. That
mm,
they don't fit into one of the, uh, they're unlikely to fit into or be found to be a refugee under one of the
like
conventional
war
grounds.
displaced, all
Uh,
of those, right?
well, someone who suffers the possibility of persecution based on
In their home
religion,
country.
political
Okay, yeah,
opinion, nationality, so forth. But there are people still in hard straits. The reason I come back to it is that at the end of the day, though, despite uh, Canadians generally having the concerns that they do,
yeah,
and genuinely, there's still a lot of people who may have legitimate claims, and we can't forget who those are. And those people who, if they were to go back to a country, maybe because of their ethnicity, because of their sexual orientation,
mm,
because of their gender, could have genuine fear of persecution.
yeah,
Another thing that's happened, and this sort of connects to the changes that there's been with the, let's say, with the students.
yeah.
So there's, as you may be
So many
aware,
students are claiming refugee
number of the
status.
students are claiming
Yes.
refugee status, and the minister uh, said the other day that he had understood anecdotally that this doesn't make sense because they've been in the country for in some cases a lengthy period of time, a couple of years or something, and then only when they're discovering that that the pathway to permanent residence isn't what they thought it might be, then okay, I'll make a refugee claim. Now, there's no doubt that he would have good reason to be, skeptical about all those claims. But I think the language to use, frankly, was indelicate in some ways because at the end of the day, we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
There's the fact that there's delays. A lot of people who practice in the area of refugee law, I don't do it in the way I used to, but will say that people will make like they may have not made refugee claims when they came in as students because
Mm,
they wanted to choose a more conventional pathway to permanent residence, and only
yeah.
when they realized that, that
That's
wasn't possible,
possible.
then
Yeah.
that they're forced into it, and that there's still very serious and concerning circumstances throughout the globe. So
Wow.
again, broad picture concerns notwithstanding, we have to always be mindful of those individual stories. It's a real problem. I mean, I've been talking, at the high level, if you will, is how one qualifies for refugee, how you get here, and how long it might take to have your claim adjudicated. But that's only part of
The
uh,
tens of
the
refugees are
picture.
from, yeah.
There's, you come here, you're waiting a few years, for a hearing. Okay, you can work. That's great if you want to, but often the jobs are going to be at a wage where it's going to be difficult to get by. As you mentioned, there's a large number of refugees who are having to access social services. That's translated into significant disagreements, in some ways disconnect, I guess, between the different levels of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, as to
I,
who's paying the bills here.
I think Canadians are also unhappy because
And Canadians
it's
are
their
happy
tax
to
money.
get,
Yeah.
and I think getting back to your, observations at the beginning, the percentage of people who are now responding to polls, oh, we're not so
Yeah.
certain about
Exactly.
supporting immigration, that all feeds into it. And I think it's the sense of, there's got to be a process. There's got to be sufficient resources to support people. There's also the accompanying, and this is an intangible dynamic, if you will. But when you're talking about the integration, there's the integration economically, of course, is how people fit in. Do they get
Exactly.
jobs? There's the integration in terms of just basic living day to day. Can they find a place to live? Can they arrange for children to go to school and so forth, and then how's the school system respond or not respond to them. But then there's the larger, difficult questions of culture that Canada, for a long time, has prided itself on. We welcome people, different, cultures. Most, people in Canada, their families were immigrants here at one time or another. We're increasingly mindful of the, uh, debt we owe to Canada's Aboriginal people, to be honest, and that most of us are immigrants in one way or another. That being said, that as more and more people come in from different cultures, not surprisingly, they're say that, oh, well, hold on, when you come here, we might have some certain expectations in terms of
Yeah,
what cultures come with you, what um, political grievances that may have existed before get transplanted to Canada and so forth. And this is, we know what is reported in the news and back and forth. And there aren't necessarily easy answers here. Again, we strive to be a country that's welcoming and inclusive, and yet at the same part of that is wanting to ensure that people continue to want to come here, and the best way of doing that is ensure that Canada is a place that many people still want to live, and that is able to welcome many people, and which can sometimes mean having some values and expectations that might be
mm,
Canadian, whatever that might be. So these are difficult questions, but they're important questions,
yeah,
and
good
they're
questions.
increasingly asked now.
Yeah,
And uh, different people, including different political parties, have different perspectives, and that's fine. And I think that these questions and possible answers can be asked and addressed in a way that can be said to be quintessentially Canadian, without drifting into darker territory.
yeah. Randy, I've got two questions for you, and I'm going to ask them because I'm loving your answer. So I'm going to ask you two questions
Yeah,
directly, and then you can weigh in, you can spread out your answer. The first question is, we had another lawyer on the show,
yeah,
just like you a few weeks back, and he said that the international definition of a refugee is someone who enters one country and they can officially claim refugee status in that country only. Now, you also mentioned that there are some people in US who will move to Canada to claim refugee status. Can they legally do that if they are refugees, if they are migrants from, say, Latin American countries? That is the first question.
yeah.
And the second question is, Canada had a model of immigration system. It envied all over the world. How did we manage to break it? And I want a lawyer's perspective on this.
Okay, so the answer, or some of my thoughts on the first question are, by and large, the definition of a refugee is someone who's outside of his or her country of habitual residence, who has a genuine fear of persecution based on one of a number of enumerated grounds, persecution based on nationality, on political opinion, religious, or being
Mm,
part of a particular social group, if you will, if they were returned to the country. All right. Now there are some exceptions. There's Canadian governments recognized, like a number of, years ago, when the civil war in a place like Colombia or something, that you could be in Colombia but still be considered a refugee even though you were still in Colombia. But by and large,
yeah,
you're outside your country of origin. And then the way it works, okay, you get to Canada
yeah.
through whatever way you do, often through surreptitious or clandestine or illegal means, through people smuggling. And then you're at the airport, you're at the land port of entry. I want to claim refugee status. And then Canada's international obligations are such that they're obliged to begin and follow a certain legal and administrative process,
Mm,
including for the most part giving people the opportunity to have an oral hearing for the determination of their claim. Now, what I was touching on earlier, this safe third party agreement with Canada and US,
is this CUSMA or is it something else?
it's something else.
Okay.
CUSMA is the
Trade agreement, right?
revamped version of NAFTA, free trade agreement, which amongst other things includes the movement of people
Okay.
and the rights of people to be able to work in the other countries that are party to the agreement: Canada, U.S., Mexico. The Safe Third Party Agreement was agreement where not quite 20 years ago, which was actually negotiated in tandem or as a update, if you will, to NAFTA. But that say, well, Canada thought we got all these people who are making refugee claims in Canada who are coming through the United States. We want an agreement that we're not obliged to take them. And that if they're
Oh,
from Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, wherever the case is, whatever the case is, or something, and the United States, and they're in the United States, they make their asylum claim
so
there.
they can't make their claim in Canada if they choose to come through US to Canada.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's now there are some exceptions, as I
Okay.
said, and there are some loopholes, as I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
But that's the broad strokes. Now, um, your second question, or the second part of what you asked about, okay, how did the system get so broken? um, I think there's a lot of people that had a hand in it. I think increasingly when I started practicing immigration law, including refugee law, many years ago, there's the law as we know. There's the legislation. There's regulations that are made under the legislation, but the legal mechanism for regulations is they still have to be go through a process where the Canadian cabinet approves them and they're published in advance and there can be comments on them. So sometimes some of the uh, flaws, if you will, or some of the problems, unintentional, can be worked out in advance, but increasingly, the government has been relying on policies or through a mechanism called ministerial instructions, where it's
Hmm.
not going through government, it's not necessarily going through cabinet. Now, they would
Wow.
say, the government, and there's, I think there is some validity to this. The advantage of this, when I said earlier, it's difficult for government to respond nimbly to a lot of what's going on in the world, so that you say, well, okay, we don't have to change the legislation or go through a whole new regulation or something. We'll have a policy and we'll announce it on Monday, and there it is, or something. The downside, as you can imagine, to that is, one, it makes life a whole lot more difficult for people like me. Okay, I'm not at the top of the priority list in terms of my life being into. I mean, just to sort of keep track of it and give informed and helpful advice to clients or prospective clients. It makes it more difficult for the clients to have some certainty, to
Yeah.
know. It means that, getting back to what we were studying about earlier, the student whose family saves up a considerable amount of money to come to Canada and think, I have this pathway to permanent residence, and then they
Yeah.
get here and they go, not so quick. Then you don't have that pathway, so that's more difficult. And as well, there's a number of uh, practical uh, problems that can sometimes arise that aren't anticipated
Oh.
by those who are designing these policies, and then they're announced, and then people like me were comparing notes. Well, what do they mean by this? What do they mean by that, or something? And it's not the most efficient way, and they of dealing with it. And they've been rolling out these changes
Oh no.
just so quickly, and I think that has contributed to the breakdown of the system. I think that's been a big part of it. The uh, geopolitical circumstances going on in the world, where Canada has understandably and appropriately tried to respond to that by saying, okay, there's problems going on in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Ukraine. What can we do? So having to sort of try to develop these humanitarian programs that facilitate immigration to Canada, but that creates stresses on the system. The reliance of employers, as we said, on the low class, as not low class, lower wage workers. And I think too, I come to it from the perspective of a longtime practitioner of immigration law. I think consultants have really contributed to a huge
Consultants.
problem. And consultants, to remind you and those listening or viewing this, in Canada, those who are legally allowed to give advice or represent prospective clients for immigration matters with Canadian authorities include those who are qualified lawyers in Canada and those who are uh, licensed consultants.
IRCC licensed consultants.
CICC,
CICC.
yeah, and the but approved by IRCC. There's CICC is their regulatory body, and it sounds good. I mean, before it was like, okay, people were someone set up shop in a place like India, immigration consultant to Canada or something, right?
Mm.
All sorts of problems. So now they say, okay, you have to do an exam, you have to do certain courses, you have to. There's lots and lots of problems with the astronomical number of people that have been approved that come through that who don't have the same legal training and professional uh, sense of professional obligations. I'll say that. And so one of the things that the minister was going on about recently that I do concur with is a serious problem with a lot of people getting bad advice from
Oh no.
consultants that or just outright fraud. And the way that contributes to the breakdown of the system is if there's look at lawyers can and do think creatively. If there's an opportunity there, and okay, will this fit for my client? And that's part of what you do as a lawyer, try to understand what the system allows for and to advocate as vigorously and on behalf of your client as you can. But there's certain lines we won't cross. And for those more likely those who aren't lawyers who are willing to cross those lines, then we'll do this and do that. And we've seen it that with the LMIA system, the
Yeah.
huge amount of fraud that's
Oh
been
my
there.
God, yes.
That
People are charging what, 30, $40,000.
yeah,
And oh my God,
we'll get
so
you this job
yeah, exactly.
offer and this and that. The same thing. It doesn't hasn't gotten as much press recently, but with a lot of the provincial nominee programs, the
Really? Oh
Canada
no.
now the provinces can have a role in nominating prospective immigrants, and they try to devise certain programs. And there's a history, not all the, across the board, but number of instances. It's almost sort of like whack-a-mole. There's a little opportunity there. People will go into
Exactly.
fraudsters, and then they. So I think that's contributed to problems. So I strongly encourage folks who might be listening or watching this to, if they think they need professional advice, to immigrate to Canada. And yes, I have a vested interest in saying it, but I do wholeheartedly believe it, that if not 100% of the time, a lot of the time, the twists and turns with Canadian immigration law is you really should have professional support. I will not say that every consultant is incapable or unethical. Of
Yeah.
course not.
No.
However, there's a serious problem with a number, including those who are abroad and who purport to work with people here and so forth. So please, 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 folks who are thinking of hiring professionals, do your homework, look online, understand exactly who it is you're dealing with. And if they promise something that is too good to be true, as the old adage goes, it probably is too good to be
It
true.
is too good to be true. Yeah, we appreciate you saying this. Not a lot of people call this out. So, yeah. I have time for one last question, Randy, and it's sort of a longer question. So please bear with me because I need to establish some context here. So, Canada, 10 years ago, we had the best median household income amongst G7 countries, and I think this is sixth quarter consecutive that our GDP per capita has been decreasing. Household income is decreasing. So something has gone wrong in the past 10 years. And we are also trying to uh, invite a lot of immigrants, economic immigrants in the country. And the vision of the Immigrant Project is to advocate for the importance of economic immigration in Canada. So, from a lawyer's perspective, we wanted to understand what sort of message our country is trying to give and what sort of message should be given out, not only to immigrants, but to all the countries out there.
Well, I'll preface my response by I, noting that I'm an immigration lawyer, not an economist. That being said,
Yeah,
I got opinions about a lot of things. So, in terms of the message that the government's been saying, I think in it's critical for the government to speak with some consistency and some clarity. And I know that can be difficult because circumstances change. But I think one of the uh, difficulties it's been is the government's veered from uh, everyone come to sorry, almost not in these words exactly, but
yeah.
seemingly we don't want anyone anymore. And
Mm,
the prime minister, if I'm not mistaken, a few years back when there were all these people pouring across Roxham Road and going through that loophole. Well, this is who we are as Canada. We accept people. Da, 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 we welcome, and less enlightened people
now
in
they've
the
closed
United
Roxton Road.
States. We're not there, and then now it's like, oh, we get. So think these things through, and whether you're a member of or a supporter of the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP, or
Mm,
anyone
block.
else. Okay, politics is politics, but that and immigrant, as I suggested earlier, immigration can and should be part of the political conversation. But for those who are leading the conversation, or those who are having uh, more um, prominent voices, if you will, the politicians, and when they're doing those political calculations, be very careful about what you say and how you say. And fine, your job number one, I suppose, for a lot of politicians is what do I have to do to get elected or reelected the next election cycle. But
I give
uh,
cuts in GST. I give $250 checks to people.
yeah, exactly. But bear in mind that whether you're you're just sort of focused on your own constituency, what's the demographic there, what do I have to say to please some people, or the larger that it's really important to bear in mind and ask some important questions, and even sometimes say some hard truths about the immigrant experience in Canada, and that in some ways, increasingly the last number of years, as you point out, we have failed both the Canadian public that's here and the prospective
Look
immigrants.
at last week, Randy Bosno, the economic
Yes,
minister, I think, minister of employment. He's
Minister of Human Resources, he was in charge of human resources
human resource.
and employment. Forgive me if I don't have the exact.
Yeah, but he was
And
he
he's
st
past history now, of course.
yeah,
But yeah, but I think and he's not the only one, I think, and
exactly.
it goes across the spectrum. I think of those who are making political hay by the certain circumstances. I think there are a number of important voices on the conservative end of the spectrum that are asking some very important and legitimate questions, and and articulating some views that maybe in
Yes.
recent history haven't found haven't resonated in Canada, but are now, and that's fine and that's important. But again, to bear in mind, again, these are real people, real circumstances at the end of people's lives, and if there's a bad actor here, we have to pay attention to the bad actor, but not lump everyone into that. And on the other end of the political spectrum, if you will, I think people have to uh, take a clear-eyed view of what is sometimes happening with immigration. That there are bad actors. That in the to take an example, the refugee determination system, although there are and it's I repeat, critical to bear in mind that we have our obligations for humanitarian reasons to welcome and facilitate the entry of refugees into Canada, and that there are people who really do need the help, but to acknowledge that there's, people who do take advantage of the
Yeah.
system. And so I think, what we need to do is not be so myopic and say it's only this or it's only that.
Yeah.
Uh, it's all very complicated. Um, that being said, I think notwithstanding the serious and important uh, stresses and problems there's been in the system lately, uh, Canada is still an extraordinary country. as we know, still so much opportunity. I think
Yes.
that notwithstanding the um, current changes and needed modifications with the system, that Canada, and the numbers are going down, as you know, or the targets are going down, but uh, the future of Canada is one that still very much includes the role of immigrants being a part of it. And,
Absolutely.
I'd welcome listeners and viewers to uh, go into the adventure of dealing with the Canadian immigration process, uh, clear-eyed, and with a willingness and ability to ask important questions, particularly of a representative or of a um, possible representative if you're talking to someone. All that being said, don't give up on the dream of Canada. It's there's lots of good stuff going on here.
Wow. On that note, I think it's time to wrap up the episode. Any last words for our listeners? Any immigrants? Anyone?
Well, just again, it's you may have heard of or seen stories, reports in the newspapers, accounts from friends, relatives, neighbors about all sorts of difficulties in Canada. And to repeat, uh, there are serious issues, and to ask important questions. But at the end of the day, uh, it's still arguably the best country
I know.
around.
Most
And
welcoming country.
it's
Friendly.
I think that, I grew up in Toronto. I lived away for a number of years. I came back to Toronto, and one of the marvelous things about Toronto is just the
Keeps
wide
bringing you
variety
back.
of culture. Sorry,
It keeps bringing you back.
it keeps bringing me back, and it's changed throughout the course of that. And there's been problems with some of the changes, not surprisingly, but there's been some wonderful things too. So don't give up on Canada, and we're all collectively, we all being not just the immigration lawyers, the politicians, the population who's weighing in with their views, the pundits who are trotting out various facts and statistics, and the good folks like you who are adding to the conversation. We're doing what we can to move the needle in a positive way, and that's what we'll do.
Thank you so much, Randy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.